Hello, friends. Today, we'll be talking about Gardens of the Moon. Or at least, I'm going to try and talk about Gardens of the Moon. So, before we get into it, I want to thank you all for watching. And if you're new to my reviews, I like to. I kind of have trouble calling them reviews because I don't like to give anything away. So, if there's a synopsis, a lot of times I will avoid a synopsis. I like to go into books blind. So when I discuss a book, I will give you as little detail as possible about the story, the characters. I'm not going to give you a beat for beat recap of what happened. It seems kind of silly to me, so I just like to talk about my thoughts, my takeaways, and kind of give you a feeling of maybe this book will be for you or not for you, and my overall enjoyment of it, or lack thereof. Now, because I structure my reviews that way, it's pretty convenient because today, talking about Gardens of the Moon, I'm not quite sure I can tell you exactly what happened to spoil it for you. So, to give you some perspective on my, to give you some perspective on my perspective, I think it's important that we run down where I'm coming from because I think different readers have different reactions to this book, and I tried to read it last year and had a totally different reaction. So let's start there. Before 2021, I hadn't read a fantasy novel in a very long time. The majority of my reading was comic books, graphic novels, the independent scene. That's what I was into. Image, Avatar, Top Cow, things like that. So when I found BookTube, Mike's Book Reviews was one of the first channels I found and I latched onto. And that's when he started his Malazan group read, and I jumped onto that. And I tried to read Gardens of the Moon, and I was very lost. I had no idea what was happening, and I thought this is just a few levels above where I am right now with fantasy, that I'm going to set it down and I'll come back to it eventually. The end of 2021, I started feeling really confident. I had a lot of fantasy under my belt. And I thought, let's give this another try. And Malazan is a series that I'm going to be reading this year in 2022. It's a big goal for me to get through this series. Not the entire series this year, but I'm going to be constantly reading it throughout the year and probably into 2023 by the time I finish the entire series. So last year, when I tried to read Gardens of the Moon, I got about 120, 130 pages in, I think, from what I remember. I'm not quite sure where exactly I left off. So when I started again this year, I thought I took it as a challenge upon myself to try and not to necessarily get it, but just to follow along better than I did before. And this time when I read it, there were some things that I remembered from my last attempt to read it. And it's funny, the things I picked up on were different than the things I picked up on last time. The things I would focus on were different than they are now, which I thought was kind of curious. And I guess when you reread books, you kind of get that. You pick up on different things. So this year, when the portions that I reread, I was following along pretty good, but it was still a very slow read. And before I started Gardens of the Moon, I had gone through some really great reads that I was just flying through. And I think as a reader, you can probably relate to that when you do go through a few books that just are just great books and you just fly through them. And you almost get what runners call a runner's high, that you just feel like you're just going and you're flying through books. And while I really enjoyed the writing, it was almost like walking through quicksand, because I would read for an hour and get through 30 pages, 20 pages sometimes. So I would read and read and read, and not that I was trying to hurry, not that that matters, but it was still a change of pace, because I would usually average about 50 to 60 pages an hour, give or take, on the previous books I read. As I was reading, I started to wonder, why am I struggling reading this? Why is it not sinking in the way that other books do? What is it about this writing style? What is it about me and the way that I'm absorbing this material? Why is it making it, why am I getting through this so slowly? Because I was enjoying it. I wasn't necessarily following along on all the different characters. There's a lot of different characters. There's a lot going on. And I think the longer chapters were because the chapters are pretty long. And I think when a book separates chapters in the shorter chapters, when there's so many characters, it helps me follow along a little bit better. But I think it's just the writing style, and it's just so dense that I would have to reread things a lot because I just couldn't quite follow along with what was happening. And the way that I like to compare it is it's almost like you're visiting a friend and they have another circle of friends, and your friend sits down and tells you all about this other circle of friends they have, and they tell you about them like you know who they are. So they tell you about these other people in the middle of a story, and you're not following along. You have no idea who these people are. You have no idea what their history is. He just tells you the story about all the other friends that they have, and you're just lost. It's kind of the way I felt, and it's almost like dropping you in the middle of a story instead of at the beginning or the end. And that's not good or bad. It's just different. It's just a different type of experience, at least for me. While there were portions of this book that I struggled with, there were other portions that I was really getting it. Like I felt like I was getting what was going on. I was following along in the story, and the action scenes were different as well. I think the action focused on a moment, and it wasn't a bigger picture. It was almost like a moment or certain specific moments in a battle, and it was a different type of combat that I was used to reading, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. There's also some really great characters that I enjoyed reading about. There were just so many of them that it became hard for me to keep up with who's who, who's lying to who, who's going where, what their intentions are. Sometimes it was tough to keep up. And that's why I think it's important that you know what my perspective is and what my experience is reading fantasy, because I think some experienced fantasy readers could follow along a little bit easier than I could, because I don't have that much time reading fantasy. I think it's going to vary depending on the way that you absorb fantasy, the way that you follow along with so many characters in these huge worlds and all this world building that's happening at one time. And it is a challenging read, but I'm into it. This is a series that a lot of people that I know on BookTube and in real life have told me that this series is spectacular. And the way that I'm approaching it is kind of like I approach The Gunslinger, is that the first book is going to be a little bit confusing. It'll make sense as you go. Just hang in there. And it's breaking some of my own rules, because I'm the type of reader now that if I'm not enjoying a book, I'll set it down and maybe I'll come back to it, maybe I won't. But I'll change to another book and I'll see if I like the other book better. But this series, I am hanging in there, and it's not like it was a chore or it was really difficult. It was challenging, but it's a challenge that I'm ready to take on. That I feel like I'm in this for the long haul, and I have faith that it'll make sense later. So while I'm not really sure exactly what happened, I'm into it. Now I know this sounds like a lot of negative. It almost sounds like I didn't enjoy it, but I actually did enjoy it. And I took this as a challenge upon myself to try and challenge myself in my reading habits and try to, understand what was happening. So I didn't put too much pressure on myself, because I think it will make sense through I think each book will be a different experience. And I did feel better about myself when I looked up some quotes from Steven Erikson about the experience of writing this book, because I did see that the way that he wrote it was if he could change some of the dialogue and some of the text, he would go back and make some changes to make it easier and like an easier, smoother read, because I think he wrote it for a UK audience, if I'm not misremembering. But I think the publisher at the time wanted him to write it a certain way, and he has some regrets over some of the choices that were made that weren't entirely his. So I did feel better about myself after that. I felt, okay, it's not just me. And I looked at some reviews, and a lot of people just didn't get it, but they still enjoyed it. So another thing that I'm trying to remember is with fantasy, that it's just one book. It's a long series. There's a long way to go. So I'm just hanging in there. Really unique moments that I haven't read in fantasy before. And we are having a spoiler-filled discussion with some friends that are reading with me, and some experts in the Malazan universe. So I will link that video up above or down below. After it happens, it's later this month. So in the month of February. So if you're watching this after our event, I'll have it linked below, so you can check that out if you want to be spoiled. So have you read Guardians of the Moon? If you have, let me know down below what you would rate it, and let me know if it's normal for someone to be so confused after reading it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, or if you've tried to read it before, what did you think? Did you continue with the series? Did you not continue? Let me know what you think, or what your experiences are down below. I think this is a really interesting conversational. This is the kind of book you want to talk about when you're done reading it, because everyone has a different experience with it. I think it's one of those books that everyone has an opinion about, whether it's good or it's bad. And it's really interesting the way that we all absorb these type of books differently. So as always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you stopping by. I hope you're having a great week, a great day, a great weekend, whenever you're watching this. I hope you're doing great, and I will talk to you soon.